Hello, this is Dr. Grande. Today's question is, can I analyze the case of John Joseph Donovan? Just a reminder, I'm not diagnosing anybody in this video, only speculating about what could be happening in a situation like this. If you enjoy this video, please like it, subscribe to my channel, and consider supporting me on Patreon. I'll put the link to Patreon in the description for this video. First, I'll look at the background of this case, including the timeline of the crimes, then offer my analysis. John Donovan was born in Lynn, Massachusetts on February 12, 1942. His family did not have a lot of money when John was growing up. They lived in a poor neighborhood. After completing high school, John went to Yale University, where he earned a master's degree in engineering and another master's degree in science before earning a PhD. John took a job as a professor at MIT. He married and eventually had 3 daughters and 2 sons. John and his wife would divorce several years later in 1980. In 1977, John established a company that would later be called Cambridge Technology Partners. He trained executives for Fortune 500 companies in the areas of sales and strategy. He had an unusual style of teaching in these seminars. For example, on at least one occasion, he had a piano player lead his students in song at the end of a teaching session. The seminars were described as cult-like, unique, and cartoonish. John started attracting a lot of attention from the media. For example, the New York Times referred to him as the Johnny Carson of the executive training circuit. John married for a second time in 1984. The couple divorced in 1990. John may have not been doing well in the area of romance, but he was doing well financially. He earned $7 million between 1987 and 1989. He purchased land in Hamilton, Massachusetts. This is on the North Shore and contains several upscale neighborhoods. John was very impressed with his own abilities. He was a self-proclaimed visionary who described himself as the world's foremost tech whisperer. He went on to establish additional technology companies. When the companies were sold or went public, John added to his fortune. For example, in the 1990s, he made $15 million when one company went public and $6.5 million from another. Both companies went bankrupt not long after that. People started to grow concerned about what John was doing. He, of course, appeared quite intelligent, but his advice was not working out too well for investors. Was he applying his intelligence in a way that made sense? In 2001, John sold his original company, Cambridge Technology Partners, for $266 million. It appears as though John wanted his children to benefit from his wealth. For example, he set up an offshore trust for them that contained almost $100 million in assets. His generosity did not seem to make all his children happy. He would later say that one of his sons, James, stopped talking to him because James felt as though John was favoring his youngest son, John Jr. John's 3 daughters cut off contact with John completely. One of his daughters accused him of offending against her when she was a child. John denied this claim. John Jr. did not seem to have the same negative feelings about his father, but when he became aware of the accusations from his siblings against his father, he arranged to meet with his father at a law office in Boston. In the conversation that occurred there, it appeared as though the children were interested in taking control of John's real estate empire. It's not clear how this connects with John's alleged offenses against his daughter, but either way, that's what his children wanted from him. John denied any wrongdoing. According to his children, he spoke to various wealthy residents of North Shore area and said that his children had betrayed him. He implied that they fabricated this terrible story to separate him from his money and his real estate. Despite his denial, John initially entered a deal that gave his children control of the real estate, but he later backed out of this arrangement. In 2003, John's children sued him to enforce the original agreement. The lawsuit would continue for many years. Eventually, a retired judge was appointed as an arbitrator. John became suspicious that his son James was the ringleader behind this effort to destroy him. He thought that James had convinced the other children to betray him. During one hearing, John allegedly said to James, quote, "You are a demon "You'll be treated as a demon should be treated," unquote. It doesn't appear as though James took this too well. He allegedly said, quote, "If I could kill my father and get away with it, I would," unquote. James denied making that statement. I find this to be curious because when a person states they would kill someone else if they could get away with it, they are pretty much guaranteeing themselves that they will not get away with it. In October 2003, John Donovan called the police, saying that someone had fired bullets into his residence in Hamilton, Massachusetts. By this point, John was married for a third time. He said he was fearful that he or his wife could be hurt or killed. No one was arrested in connection with this alleged shooting. As the contentious legal proceedings between John and his children continued, the case took a surprising turn. On December 16, 2005, John was provided questions related to the accusations made by his daughter. Again, she said that he offended against her when she was young. On that same night, John was sitting in his minivan in a parking lot near his business office when he called 911. He said that he had been shot. During his conversation with the operator, John revealed that a big guy wearing a mask shot him. Another guy who was with the shooter told him that James said he would kill him. John specified that he meant James Donovan, his son. John went on to say that one of the men indicated that there were 4 more people to get. Presumably the man meant to kill. John thought specifically that the men were threatening to get rid of witnesses. John also accused his son, James Donovan, of laundering $180 million through Goldman Sachs and saying that he would kill him. John was transported to the hospital, where those who treated him found his story difficult to believe. The circumstances of the shooting were bizarre. A few examples. John said that he was shot 3 times. He only had one .22 caliber bullet wound, but there were 2 holes in his metal belt buckle. Physicians found glass in John's right ear, but ostensibly John was shot through the driver's side door window of his minivan. John insisted that the glass was actually a bullet fragment. In a theatrical fashion, John pretended to cough up a bullet. It seems clear that he had placed the bullet in his mouth before first responders arrived. The bullet wound to John's abdomen was unusual. It was like John had squeezed fat from his abdomen and fired the bullet through it, as if the wound was designed to give the person the maximum chance of survival. Maybe the shooters were trying to kill John's fat. Sometimes people say that they're trying to blast fat away. Maybe the assassins took that literally. The police searched the house of John's son, James, for almost 4 hours. James had an alibi, and the police were able to confirm it. When the police met with John, he told them that James had hired 2 Russian assassins. He said that James was trying to cover up his own offenses by having John murdered. The police did not believe that James had hired the assassins. They thought that John was the shooter. The scene was staged to falsely accuse James. John was interviewed by the district attorney in March of 2006. This was an opportunity for him to get his story straight. During this conversation, John did not stick with the details from the shooting itself. Rather, he wandered into topics about his business dealings, his legacy, and how he started off poor and became wealthy. The investigation uncovered evidence that did not look too good for John. A few examples. Just a few days before the incident, John had redirected a security camera near the site of the shooting. In John's coat pocket, the police found a restaurant menu which contained a to-do list. Here are some of the items from the list: face, mouth, belly, 8 shells, 4 in front, 4 outside, glass, gloves, rifle, fake happy. John also wrote glass gun, where, shot where, belt, coat. I'm curious about what John meant by fake happy. Did he think that after he staged the incident, he needed to pretend that he was happy? People who are shot usually have a lot of emotions, but happy is typically not among them. In May of 2006, John was charged in connection with filing a false police report. In August of 2007, he was convicted and sentenced to 2 years of probation. The judge referred to John's behavior as bizarre and premeditated. After being convicted, John continued to deny that he staged the shooting. I don't know if John was really upset about 2 years of probation, but he may have been upset by his financial situation after his conviction. He was no longer attracting work in the area of technology consulting. John was careful in the shooting not to mortally injure himself, but he still managed to assassinate his reputation. In that regard, he was more efficient than 2 Russian assassins ever could have been. Nobody was interested in John's services anymore. Sometime after John was convicted, his son, John Jr., was diagnosed with a rare cancer. This condition was terminal. John Jr. carefully detailed what he wanted to happen with his estate and his family after his death. He indicated that he wanted his wife to be responsible for raising his children. John Jr. specifically said that he did not grant any authority to his father in regard to his children's upbringing. On April 24, 2015, one day before John Jr. died, he sent an email to the arbitrator of the ongoing lawsuit and repeated his desire to exclude his father, even asking for a restraining order. Before John Jr. died, his father, John Donovan, had secretly recorded a number of conversations. Not long after his son died, John filed legal documents in an effort to gain ownership of his son's estate. Some of the documents were forgeries. John sent the arbitrator a video of John Jr. The video was clearly edited using the audio from the secret recordings. The new message of the video was that John Jr. wanted his father to oversee his estate. The arbitrator concluded that John was trying to defraud his son's estate. John Donovan was indicted for forgery. He was convicted and sentenced to 2 years in prison. John is permanently banned from coming within 100 yards of any of his children, their spouses, or his grandchildren. Now moving to my analysis. Here are my thoughts on a few areas that stood out to me in this case. Item number 1. When John was a professor, he was well liked by his students. They said that he had infectious enthusiasm. After continued interactions, however, the students realized that John had a darker side. Later, someone who was in business with John implied that his charisma was over the top, comical, and forced, although John did have a mystical ability to connect with strangers. Many people who commit crimes involving manipulation are charismatic. Just like any trait, a person can have too much charisma. When this happens, more people will reject them as fake and unconvincing, but the people who believe in a highly charismatic con artist will really believe them. It was almost like John was a cult leader for people in the technology industry. He was comically obvious to most people, but like a spiritual leader to a few people. For a cult leader, a few followers is all they need to be successful. Also, like a cult leader, John had a particular gift for connecting with people who were afraid, specifically in the technology industry. People who were afraid of losing their jobs because of technological advancement were highly attracted to John. Item number 2. John assumed that he was intelligent, but he also assumed that everyone else was not. Just like his charisma was obviously over the top, his attempts to defraud were obvious, like when he staged the shooting and edited the video of his son. John had so little confidence in the intelligence of people that he felt compelled to spell out all of those details in the 911 call. It's hard to believe that the assassins would tell John all this information as they're shooting him. It never occurred to John that assassins typically don't provide a lot of information to their victims. Either John had the most talkative Russian assassins ever, or he was staging the shooting. It sounds like John was inspired by James Bond villains, who typically, unnecessarily, explain to James Bond all the details of their master criminal plans. John put a lot of thought and planning into his crimes. They were complex, but without empathy, he did not understand how people would feel about his behavior. He didn't realize how they would look at him with a tremendous amount of suspicion. John had a lot of intelligence, but very little insight. Item number 3. During all the legal drama that John was involved in, it was reported that he embezzled from a business that provided an unusual service. Essentially, the company would send items or messages to people on behalf of their customers after their customers died. The business was called Send It Later. With that title, they're not kidding when using the word later. They mean way later. There are other companies that offer the same type of service, sending messages from beyond the grave. I don't think this type of service is a great idea as far as mental health. Messages like this can disturb people. There's a finality about death that is disrespected by sending messages after death. Although, who knows? A lot of people waste money on psychics. They do this because they think the psychics are giving them messages beyond the grave. I also think that a certain type of person might be attracted to this as far as being a customer. For example, some people have trouble communicating with others because they are afraid of the response. Maybe the service would be appealing to them because they could send messages with no worries about being around to receive a response. Perhaps the living family members would want to hear what their dead relative really thought of them rather than not knowing. Overall, I still think it's a bad idea, but I guess there's a customer for just about every type of business. Investors in these types of companies always believe they're finding something new and innovative, like they were the first people ever to think of the idea. If they really want to push the limits, they should invest in a company that looks at the other unexplored area of sending messages from non-existence. How about one that allows people who have not yet been conceived to send messages? Imagine the reaction of a couple who is planning to have a child in a few years when they get that message. Perhaps the message would be something like, private schools are expensive, don't go spending too much money, or whatever you do, give me a name that's easy to spell. This novel business idea, of course, makes no sense. People who do not yet exist would have no money to order the service. And, of course, customers typically have to exist before being able to patronize a business. Now, moving to my final thoughts. The case of John Donovan illustrates how far someone will go when they are motivated by greed and revenge. John spent years trying to get revenge against his children after they accused him of wrongdoing. He took the concept of playing the victim to an extreme. The problem was, he just wasn't that good at it. Those are my thoughts in the case of John Donovan. Please put any opinions and thoughts in the comment section. They always generate an interesting dialogue. As always, I hope you found my analysis to be as intriguing as a message from the pre-existing. Thanks for watching.